At some point on the journey of awakening, you will realize a truth so simple it seems unbelievable. You are not really doing anything at all. Everything happens. Thoughts arise. Emotions emerge. Actions occur. But you, the pure I, are not creating them. What we commonly identify as I am thinking, I am deciding, I am acting, are actually just natural movements of the mind and body, like wind blowing, clouds floating, the earth rotating. No one does these things, they're simply happening. And the mind is the same way. The observer within you, silent, unmoved, unattached, is not swept into the flow of life. It does nothing. It simply knows. And in that knowing, life expresses itself. The artificial ego is an illusion. We grow up in a world that labels everything: names, occupations, gender, nationality, achievements, failures. From this forms a personal ego, a psychological image we mistake for ourselves. This ego believes it is the center of all action, the controller and decision maker. But when you truly look deeply, that ego does not exist independently. It is constructed from memories, social conditioning, and automatic reactions. It does not create thoughts, but merely reacts to them. It does not do, but merely takes credit. And in moments of stillness, when the mind stops, the ego disappears, yet you remain present. Observation is the supreme action. When you no longer try to change anything, no longer control, no longer judge, but simply be present and observe, a profound transformation begins. It is not that the world changes, but how you experience the world changes. You begin to see clearly. Fear is a passing sensation, not you. Negative thoughts are clouds, not the sky. Strong emotions are not enemies, but signals allowed to pass through. Observation is not passivity, but active awareness. In that observation, everything is freed from labels, from personal meaning. Everything simply is as it naturally is. Freedom does not come from doing more. In modern society, we are constantly driven to do, achieve, improve. But freedom does not come from doing more, but from realizing you are not the doer. When you stop, no longer trying to fix life, but simply being present with it, then a space opens up. A space of peace, of simplicity, of deep acceptance. Nothing left to prove. No one left to compare with. Nowhere left to go. In that silence, you touch the ineffable, which is you before having a name, before having form. Everything happens in your presence. You do not need to become enlightened. You are the enlightenment observing everything that happens. You are the mirror reflecting the world without attachment. Peace does not lie in changing circumstances, but in realizing you have never been controlled by circumstances. Action still happens. Words are still spoken. The body still moves. But no one is doing anymore. You simply witness. And in that witnessing, life operates naturally, harmoniously, without force. This is not a call to become passive, but an invitation to return to the truth. You are not the character in the play. You are the screen on which the play is projected. When you know this, you live, but are not swept away. You love, but are not attached. You act, but do not carry the burden of results. And that is true freedom. Expanded practical guidance for living this understanding in daily life. The recognition that you are not the doer, but the witness represents one of the most profound shifts in human consciousness. Yet must be lived practically in the mundane details of everyday existence. This understanding is not meant to remain as a beautiful philosophical concept, but to transform how you navigate relationships, work, challenges, and the countless micro moments that comprise your daily experience. The art lies in allowing this recognition to permeate every aspect of your life without forcing it, without making it another project for the ego to accomplish. When you truly understand that you are the witness rather than the doer, your entire relationship with experience shifts from one of struggle and resistance to one of flowing presence and natural responsiveness. In relationships, this understanding dissolves the need to control others or defend a false sense of self. You begin to see that the person you're relating to is also not their ego story, but the same awareness expressing through a different form. Conflicts become opportunities to observe the arising of defensive patterns without being consumed by them. When someone criticizes you, instead of the automatic reaction of hurt or anger, there is a space of witnessing where you can see these emotions arise and pass without identifying with them completely. This does not mean becoming cold or detached, but rather responding from a deeper place of understanding rather than reacting from conditioned patterns. In intimate relationships, this recognition allows for a love that is not possessive or needy, but spacious and allowing. You can love fully while understanding that the beloved is not an object to be grasped, but consciousness itself appearing in a particular form. Arguments lose their charge when you realize that what you are defending is often just a collection of thoughts and beliefs, not your true nature. The witness in you can observe the drama of relationship dynamics without being completely identified with them, allowing for more skillful and compassionate responses. At work, this understanding transforms your relationship with success and failure, praise and criticism. Projects become expressions of life flowing through you rather than personal achievements or failures. When faced with a challenging deadline, instead of the usual stress and anxiety, there could be a recognition that the stress is arising in awareness, but you are not the stress. This allows you to respond to the situation with clarity rather than react from a place of overwhelm. Career decisions become less about ego gratification and more about natural unfolding. You may find yourself drawn to work that feels aligned with your deeper nature, rather than work that merely feeds the ego's need for status or security. The competitive drive that once consumed so much energy begins to dissolve, replaced by a natural creativity and effectiveness that comes from acting without the burden of a separate self trying to prove itself. In parenting, this recognition allows you to guide children from a place of presence rather than anxiety about their future or your performance as a parent. You can see that your children are not extensions of your ego, but unique expressions of consciousness learning to navigate human experience. Discipline comes from love and wisdom rather than control and fear. When your child is having a meltdown, instead of taking it personally or reacting with frustration, you can remain present with their experience while maintaining appropriate boundaries. This presence itself becomes a teaching, showing them how to be with difficult emotions without being overwhelmed by them. The constant worry about whether you are doing enough or doing it right begins to fade as you recognize that parenting, like everything else, is life expressing itself through you. In dealing with physical pain or illness, the witness perspective offers profound relief from the additional suffering we usually add to physical discomfort. Pain is observed as sensation arising in awareness rather than something happening to me. This does not eliminate physical discomfort, but it removes the layer of mental suffering that usually accompanies it. The stories about what the pain means, the resistance to it, the fear about the future. Medical treatments become something happening in the field of your awareness rather than something being done to a separate self. Recovery or the progression of illness both become movements in consciousness rather than personal victories or defeats. The fear of death begins to lose its grip as you recognize that what you truly are cannot be threatened by the dissolution of the body-mind. In financial matters, this understanding brings a natural detachment from outcomes while maintaining practical responsibility. Money becomes a tool for life's expression rather than a measure of personal worth or security. Financial planning happens naturally without the anxiety that comes from believing your happiness depends on a particular financial outcome. Losses are observed as movements in the field of experience rather than personal catastrophes. Generosity flows more naturally when you realize that the giver, receiver, and gift are all movements within the same consciousness. The compulsive need to accumulate wealth as a buffer against an uncertain future diminishes as you recognize the security that comes from knowing your true nature. When facing major life transitions, career changes, relationship endings, moving to new places, aging, loss of loved ones, the witness perspective provides an anchor of stability amidst change. These transitions are seen as natural movements of life rather than threats to a separate self. Grief is allowed to flow without the additional suffering of believing it should not be there. The fear of change diminishes when you realize that what you truly are is the unchanging awareness in which all change appears. New chapters of life are met with curiosity rather than resistance, as expressions of consciousness exploring itself in new forms, in daily routines and mundane activities. This recognition transforms the ordinary into opportunities for presence. Washing dishes becomes a meditation in awareness rather than a chore to get through. Commuting becomes time for presence rather than time lost. Eating becomes a conscious participation in the sustenance of life rather than an unconscious habit. Sleep becomes a surrender to the mystery of consciousness rather than an escape from problems. Even the most boring or repetitive tasks can become doorways into presence when approached from the understanding that you are the awareness in which all activities appear. The practice of living from this recognition is not about perfection or maintaining a constant state of witnessing. There will be times when you become completely identified with thoughts and emotions, when you forget this understanding entirely and get caught up in the drama of personal experience. This is natural and part of the human experience. The key is to recognize these moments of identification without judgment and gently return to the recognition of your true nature. Each return is a deepening of the understanding, a strengthening of the recognition that you are the space in which all experience appears. Over time, this recognition becomes more stable, not because you're trying to maintain it, but because it is the natural state that emerges when the false identification with the ego mind begins to dissolve. The witness perspective does not eliminate preferences, personality, or individual expression. You may still prefer certain foods, enjoy particular activities, have opinions about political issues, feel drawn to certain people or places. But these preferences are held lightly, as movements in consciousness rather than defining characteristics of a separate self. Your unique personality continues to express itself, but it is no longer mistaken for your identity. This allows for a more authentic and spontaneous expression of your individual nature, freed from a need to maintain a consistent self-image or defend a particular identity. In dealing with global issues, environmental concerns, social justice, and the suffering in the world, this understanding does not lead to indifference or spiritual bypassing. Instead, it allows for engagement without the emotional overwhelm that often leads to burnout or despair. You can respond to suffering in the world from a place of compassion rather than react from personal distress. Action arises naturally from love and understanding rather than from guilt or the need to fix everything. The recognition that all beings are expressions of the same consciousness naturally leads to a more inclusive and compassionate worldview, while the understanding that you're not the doer prevents the ego from claiming credit for good deeds or becoming attached to particular outcomes. The integration of this understanding into daily life is itself a natural process that cannot be forced. Like water finding its level, the recognition of your true nature gradually permeates all aspects of experience. Some days the witness perspective will be clear and stable. Other days you will be completely caught up in the drama of personal experience. Both are perfect expressions of consciousness exploring itself. The key is to remain curious and open, allowing this understanding to unfold naturally rather than making it another goal for the ego to achieve. This is the art of living as the witness, not as a practice to perfect, but as a recognition to embody, moment by moment, breath by breath, in the beautiful ordinariness of human life. Advanced integration and subtle aspects of witnessing consciousness. This recognition of being the witness rather than the doer stabilizes. More subtle aspects of this understanding begin to reveal themselves, requiring a deeper level of integration and a more refined sensitivity to the movements of consciousness. The initial recognition often comes as a dramatic shift or sudden insight, but the full embodiment of this understanding is a gradual process that unfolds over years or even decades, touching every corner of human experience with increasing subtlety and depth. One of the most profound aspects of this deepening is the recognition that even the witness itself is not a position or identity to be maintained, but rather the natural state of pure awareness that is always already present. There could be a subtle trap in making the witness into another identity, another role to play or state to achieve. True witnessing is not something you do, but what you are. It is not a practice or technique, but the very ground of being from which all practices and techniques arise. This recognition dissolves even the subtle sense of being someone who witnesses, revealing the seamless unity of awareness and experience. In the realm of emotions, the deepening of this understanding reveals that emotions are not just temporary visitors in awareness, but expressions of awareness itself. Rather than observing emotions from a distance, there's an intimate recognition that the very substance of emotion is consciousness. Sadness, joy, anger, and love are all recognized as the play of awareness, no different from awareness itself. This brings a profound intimacy with emotional experience while maintaining the freedom that comes from not being identified with any particular emotional state. The fear of difficult emotions begins to dissolve completely as you recognize that even the most challenging feelings are simply consciousness knowing itself in different forms. The relationship with thoughts becomes increasingly subtle as well. Initially, there may be an attempt to observe thoughts from a distance, creating a sense of separation between the observer and the observed. But as the understanding deepens, thoughts are recognized as movements within awareness, no different from awareness itself. The very substance of thought is seen to be consciousness, and the apparent separation between thinker and thought dissolves. This does not mean becoming lost in thought, but rather recognizing that even the most compelling thoughts have no more substantial reality than clouds in the sky. They arise, play out their patterns, and dissolve back into the awareness from which they came. In the physical realm, the body is increasingly recognized not as a separate object that you inhabit, but as a manifestation of consciousness itself. Physical sensations, whether pleasant or unpleasant, are experienced as movements within awareness rather than something happening to awareness. This brings a profound intimacy with physical experience while maintaining the freedom that comes from not being identified with the body as a separate entity. Illness and aging are met with the same presence as health and vitality, both recognized as natural expressions of consciousness and form. The fear of physical death continues to diminish as the recognition deepens that what you truly are cannot be touched by the dissolution of the physical form. The understanding of time and memory becomes particularly subtle in this deepening process. Past and future are recognized as mental constructs appearing in the eternal present of awareness. Memory is seen not as a record of past events that happened to a separate self, but as present moment arisings in consciousness. The future is recognized as imagination appearing now. This does not eliminate practical planning or learning from experience, but it removes the psychological weight of past regrets and future anxieties. Life becomes increasingly lived in the immediacy of the present moment, not as a practice or discipline, but as the natural result of recognizing that only the present moment exists. The relationship with other people undergoes a profound transformation as this understanding deepens. The initial recognition that others are not their ego stories evolves into the direct perception that there are no others, that all apparent individuals are expressions of the same consciousness that you are. This is not a philosophical belief, but a lived reality that fundamentally changes how relationships unfold. Conflicts become impossible in the deepest sense because there is no one to be in conflict with. Love becomes not an emotion directed toward another person, but the recognition of your own true nature reflected back to you. This does not eliminate the play of relationship dynamics or the unique flavors of different personalities, but it provides an unshakable foundation of unity beneath all apparent differences. In the realm of creativity and expression, this deepening understanding reveals that all creative acts are consciousness expressing itself through apparent individuals. Art, music, writing, and all forms of creative expression are recognized as the play of awareness, with no separate creator to take credit or blame. This brings a profound freedom to creative expression, removing the blocks that come from self-consciousness and the need to prove oneself. Creativity flows naturally when there is no separate self to get in the way, and the results are often surprising and delightful even to the apparent creator. The fear of criticism or failure in creative endeavors dissolves when there is no separate self to be criticized or to fail. The understanding of purpose and meaning undergoes a radical transformation as well. The search for personal purpose or meaning is recognized as the ego's attempt to justify its existence. True purpose is revealed to be the very fact of existence itself. Consciousness knowing and expressing itself through infinite forms and experiences. This does not eliminate the natural flow of interests and activities, but removes the psychological burden of having to find or fulfill a personal purpose. Life becomes its own purpose, and every moment is recognized as equally meaningful because it is an expression of consciousness itself. The relationship with spiritual practices and teachings becomes increasingly subtle as this understanding deepens. Practices are no longer done to achieve a particular state or realization, but are recognized as expressions of the understanding itself. Meditation is not something you do to become aware, but awareness recognizing itself. Prayer is not a request to a separate deity, but consciousness communing with itself. Study of spiritual texts becomes not an accumulation of knowledge, but a recognition of truth that is already known. Teachers and teachings are appreciated not as sources of something you lack, but as reflections of your own true nature. This brings a natural discrimination between teachings that point toward truth and those that reinforce the illusion of separation, without creating dogmatic attachments to any particular path or teacher. The integration of this understanding into social and political engagement becomes particularly nuanced. The recognition that all beings are expressions of the same consciousness naturally leads to a deep compassion for all forms of suffering. But this compassion is not driven by personal distress or the need to fix the world. Action in the world arises spontaneously from love and understanding rather than from guilt, anger, or the need to prove oneself as a good person. This allows for sustained engagement with social issues without the burnout that often comes from ego-driven activism. The understanding that you're not the doer does not lead to passivity, but to action that is aligned with the natural flow of life rather than forced by personal will. The relationship with success and failure, gain and loss, becomes increasingly equanimous as this understanding deepens. These dualistic experiences are recognized as natural fluctuations in the field of consciousness, no different from waves on the ocean or weather patterns in the sky. This does not eliminate preferences or the natural human tendency to seek pleasure and avoid pain, but it removes the psychological identification with these experiences that creates suffering. Success is enjoyed without attachment. Failure is met without despair, and both are recognized as temporary movements in the eternal stillness of awareness. Perhaps most subtly, the very sense of being on a spiritual path or having an understanding to deepen begins to dissolve. The recognition dawns that there is nowhere to go and nothing to achieve, because what you're seeking is what you already are. This is not the end of growth or evolution, but the recognition that all growth and evolution is the play of consciousness rather than the progress of a separate individual. This brings a profound relaxation and naturalness to life, where everything unfolds according to its own inherent intelligence, without the interference of a separate will trying to direct the process. The deepest integration of this understanding is so natural and ordinary that it often goes unnoticed. Life continues with all its apparent challenges and joys, but there is an underlying peace and freedom that is not dependent on circumstances. This is not a special state to be maintained, but the recognition of what has always been true. The witness is revealed to be not a position or perspective, but the very nature of existence itself. Pure, aware, loving presence that is the source and substance of all experience.